صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله ورسوله ولا تولوا عنه وأنتم تسمعون ولا تكونوا كالذين قالوا سمعنا وهم لا يسمعون إن شر الدواب عند الله صم البكم الذين لا يعقلون ولو علم الله فيهم خيرا لأسمعهم ولو أسمعهم لتولوا وهم معرضون يا أيها الذين آمنوا استجيبوا لله وللرسول إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم واعلموا أن الله يحول بين المرء وقلبه وأنه إليه تحشرون واتقوا فتنة لا تصيبن الذين ظلموا منكم خاصة واعلموا أن الله شديد العقاب واذكروا إذ أنتم قليل مستضعفون في الأرض تخافون أن يتخطفكم الناس فآواكم وأيدكم بنصره ورزقكم من الطيبات لعلكم تشكرون يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تخونوا الله والرسول ولا تخونوا أماناتكم وأنتم تعلمون واعلموا أنما أموالكم وأولادكم فتنة وأن الله عنده أجر عظيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن تتقوا الله يجعل لكم فرقانا ويكفر عنكم سيئاتكم ويغفر لكم والله ذو الفضل العظيم وإذ يمكر بك الذين كفروا ليثبتوك أو يقتلوك أو يخرجوك ويمكرون ويمكر الله والله خير الماكرين صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you, brother, for that beautiful recitation. Please recite aloud salawat. Brothers, if you could have you move up a little bit closer to the table so that people in the back can fit, that would be great. And then we're blessed to have Sheikh Salim with us tonight, so help me welcome him with a loud salawat.
for the benefit of the marhumin, of the sponsors of tonight's program, and all of your marhumin and marhumat, and all the marhumin and marhumat and the shuhada of Islam, let's gift them with a recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وخاتم النبيين وسيد المرسلين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعن الله الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من ليلتنا هذه إلى قيام يوم الدين. Respected sisters, brothers, may Allah reward you for coming to commemorate the anniversary of the rihla of our Prophet and of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba. Inshallah, this act of yours is something which is pleasing to Allah, and inshallah something which will earn you the shafa'ah of Rasulullah on the Day of Judgment, and also inshallah something that's pleasing to the heart of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam. Tonight is Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Tonight is a very grave and great occasion, and sometimes because of the weeks that we've spent commemorating Ashura and then what happened afterwards and Arba'in, when we get to this event, we're a little bit tired, and it's been a long haul. That shouldn't be an excuse to downplay the significance of this event. And I know that many of you have been attending majalis sometimes 3-4 a day, or 5-6 or 7-8 sometimes. And just like, okay, just another thing here, But it's very important for us to realize that, there are times where it really matters, like there's really a significant event. The fact that throughout their lives, the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam would frequently remember this particular incident is an indication that for us it's very important to take it seriously. Even if you go to the incidents of Karbala and you look at the speeches of Sayyidah Zainab salamullahi alayha, you'll see that she would more than once refer to the occasion that we're going to commemorate tonight, which is the departure of our Prophet from this world. It's a very significant event. And in order for us to appreciate that, we have to be present in that, with that mindset that, okay, I'm not just here, whatever, I had a good food, now I'm going to sit back, kick back, listen for a couple of jokes, whatever, and then, no, this is serious. This is what it means. This is part of being, connected to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. This is part of our duty. And when we, inshallah, participate in these gatherings, what we're trying to do is to gain an appreciation, a greater appreciation of who our Prophet was and his significance and what we can learn from him, and really act upon that command that we have from the Quran, which is to take our Prophet as a role model. So last night I began this topic. I want to briefly summarize it and then continue from there. It's the topic of looking at influence and how do we influence other people. And I explained how there's a lot of reasons for why we want to be influential people. I mean, if you, let's say you want to be a good leader, you want to be a leader in your company, you want to be a leader in your community, one of the main ways of being an effective leader is by being influential, being able to influence people in a certain direction. If you want to have a good family, right, you want to be able to influence your siblings, you want to be able to influence your children, and you want to be able to, somehow make a difference in their lives. If you're an educator, same thing. So influence is something that's talked about a lot. If you want to sell a product, right, it's something we just talked about. And last night we talked about how there's something called the six weapons of influence that have been, kind of determined by psychologists. Now, we said that those six weapons might be effective within their own domain. And one of the brothers who is in marketing last night, he was telling me that these six weapons, since that time in 1984 when he published his book, different disciplines have taken this and they've pretty much said the same thing, but in different words. Right? So it's pretty widespread that you use these techniques, and that's the way to really have an impact. That's the way you really can grab the hearts and the minds of people. Things like when you do something and then there's reciprocal sort of, you give something and you get back something, right? Things like where you follow the group. Basically, you make it seem like everyone's doing this thing, so you have to do it as well. Right? And we looked at a few of those, and we saw how, in the case of the most influential figure in history, and the fastest spreading movement, and which was actually a miracle in itself, meaning Islam and our Prophet, that many of these, supposedly like sure principles, like if you want to be influential, you have to follow these. Many of these didn't apply. They just didn't work because it didn't make sense. I mean, you had people who were in the minority who were, basically making very brave stances in order to be firm to their commitment to the faith. And they were giving up everything. They weren't gaining anything, and yet they were very much influenced by our Prophet. So how did he achieve this? What were his techniques, and is there something that we can learn from that? And so last night, I was referring to the second to last ayah from Surah At-Tawbah, where Allah explains a few of the very amazing characteristics of our Prophet. And we just looked at two of those characteristics, and we were talking about how those are things that we can learn from as ways of being influential with other people. One of those that was mentioned was that the Prophet was harisun alaykum. And if you remember, we said the haris is a word which the literal translation is greedy. But greedy in Arabic does not always have a negative connotation. Greed in Arabic can be very positive. Like you can be somebody who's greedy for justice. The Quran mentions that. And you can be somebody who's greedy for the salvation of other people. You can be greedy for their success. And that's the way our Prophet was. He was harisun alaykum. Every human being, he was really desiring in a very great way. Just the same way, or even more. Think about somebody who's counting every penny, right? Really, really keen on making that fortune, right? They're greedy for money. Now, you take out the negative connotations, you take out the money, and you say that somebody who's really covetous, really wanting people to be guided. That's the way our Prophet was. And we talked about how that's something which is something we can learn from, like the idea of really caring for somebody in that sense. Now, tonight, inshallah, with the help of Allah, we're going to look at one of these other characteristics that's mentioned in that ayah of the Quran, where Allah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم لقد جاءكم رسول من أنفسكم عزيز عليه ما عنتم حريص عليكم بالمؤمنين رؤوف رحيم. Inshallah, you can help me with salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There has certainly come to you an apostle from among yourselves. Now, who is this prophet? Right? What are his characteristics? Grievous to him is your distress. He has deep concern for you, and he is most kind and merciful to the faithful. Let's look at this characteristic. Azizun alayhi ma anittum. Okay, Aziz in Arabic, a lot of times it's used in the sense of somebody who is mighty and undefeatable. Like for example, Allah is Aziz, Azizun Hakim. That's one of the meanings of Aziz. Another meaning of Aziz is something which is very rare, it's very precious. There's a third meaning of Aziz, which is the meaning that's used in this ayah, where something is very difficult. Like you probably are familiar with that line from Dua Nudba, where we say, Azizun alayya an ara al-khalqa wa la tura. Right? Meaning what? Meaning that it's really difficult for me, oh Imam, like I'm talking to Imam all the time, that I see everyone else, but I can't, but you're not to be seen. Right? That's something which is hard for me to bear. Right? That's the meaning of Aziz in this ayah of the Quran. Azizun alayhi, meaning it's something which is really, when it's used with ala, it's something which is really weighing down upon him. It's very heavy and hard for him to bear. What is it that is hard for the Prophet to bear? Ma anittum. Okay, now this is really interesting. Just a reminder, this ayah is coming at the end of Surah Tawbah. In Surah Tawbah, as I mentioned yesterday, it's a surah which talks about a lot of responsibilities that Muslims have. Many of them are not easy for them to fulfill. Right? Islam has those taklifs and those responsibilities which are pretty easy to do, which are fun, which are appealing, right? Like breaking your fast, right? That's pretty appealing. And then there's part which is hard, which is keeping that fast before it, right? So in Surah Tawbah, it talks about some of these difficult ones. Like, for example, when the enemy gathers together and they're about to attack the Islamic lands, you got to do something about it, right? Even if it's time for you to harvest your crops, you got to get ready and you got to get your weapons and you got to go and fight them. Right? That's not easy for a lot of people. So there were these types of things that is mentioned in Surah Tawbah. And it's talking about like different trials and tribulations that the Muslims are facing. At the end, Allah is kind of summing it up. And he's saying what? He's saying that, look at, Azizun alayhi ma'anitum. This prophet of yours is somebody who all the difficulties that you face, anat and anittum is something which is a difficult thing that you go through, a struggle that you go through. That is something which is hard for our prophet to bear, the struggles that you go through. Right? This is really beautiful, right? Because it talks about this concept of our prophet being somebody who bears the burden of the burdens that his ummah goes through, right? Different people are facing different difficulties in life, different struggles, whether it be fulfilling the commands of God, whether it be standing up to, the attacks of the naysayers, whether it be, let's say, loss of family members, whether it be loss of jobs, whether it be sicknesses, and so many other things in their lives. The Prophet is somebody who is bearing those things along with them. They're not alone in the struggles they have to face. Now, in today's world, right, what is this concept known as, right? There's this buzzword that you probably have heard before. It's called empathy, right? What is empathy? Empathy is, they say it's more than just like sympathy. Sympathy is, well, they say three things. There's sympathy, there's empathy, and there's apathy. Okay, sympathy is where you feel bad about some type of struggle that somebody else is going through. Okay? You're moved, right? You might shed a tear and you tell them, I'm sorry for what you did, for what's happening to you. Apathy is, of course, where you just don't feel anything, right? Empathy is where you're taking it to the next level. What are you doing? Right? You are creating an awareness within yourself of what is happening to that person right now. And in doing so, you're developing a connection with them. Right? And what they say is that if you really want to help somebody who's going through some type of struggle, the best way of doing that is to be there for them and to be able to connect with them. And know that you are feeling, at least to some extent, you're sharing in the pain that they are facing, right? And this is something which has been shown, like has been proven, right? When people go to therapists, for example, they have some issue. They need to get some healing. They need to get some sort of direction. What they've shown is that typically the techniques that the therapists use are not that important, actually. What's more important is that connection that person makes with that therapist. Right? That they know that there's somebody there who actually is there for them and who is aware of what's going on with them. Now, how was our Prophet like this? What did he used to do? Right? One of the things the Quran tells us is that the Prophet was an extremely apt listener. right? How do we know this? Because he was such a good listener that his enemies used to make fun of him because of how much he used to listen to people. Right? What did they say? It's in Surah Tawbah, also the verses mentioned earlier in the surah. If you say salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, inshallah. Okay, anyhow, I don't have the ayah right now, but it says that the hypocrites, what they do, they used to call him an udhun. قُلْ هُوَ أُذُنُ خَيْرٍ لَكُمْ. Tell them that yes, he is a listener, but he is a listener who his listening is good for you. It's khair, it's something which is beneficial to you. The Prophet used to listen to people. One of the things that makes somebody empathetic is they actually listen. All right? Now, this is super important, right? In relationships, one of the crises, we have a crisis right now in our society, which is the breakdown of relationships. Sometimes, you almost feel like it's deliberate, like we're being forced to basically cut off all ties we have with real people, right? Just sit at home, get on your device, and connect with people that way if you really have to, right? There's a crisis of relationships. We need to know, we need to relearn, like, what is the art of having proper relationships with people? And one of the key elements of that is having a good listening ear. Right? Listening is more than just hearing somebody. Listening requires work. Listening requires connection. Listening requires really trying to put yourself in that person's shoes and understanding what they're going through. And when somebody's able to do that, they become very effective. Our Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one time, he was very much distressed in Makkah. He had just gained a handful of followers there. And so he thought, and through divine revelation and help and assistance, he decided that he would go to Ta'if, which was a nearby city, and perhaps he would find some supporters there. This is before he went to Medina. So he goes to Ta'if, and he has a plan to be able to preach to the people. And he says that, let me go to one of the families that's very influential and see if they will accept the message, and then by that way, I'll be able to spread it throughout the entire city. He goes, and there's 3 brothers, right? And they hear him out, and they hear about Islam. They think about it, and then one of them says that, to be honest, right? He says that I'd rather go and tear the cloth off of the Kaaba and shred it into pieces than to accept you as the Prophet of God. Right? The other one, makes a similar excuse. The other one says that, he's a little bit more decent and polite. He says that, if you really are a prophet, then you're too high and mighty for me to talk to you, because you're like up there and I'm like down here. And so I can't really talk to you anymore. And if you're not a prophet and you're just making up this whole thing up about your receiving revelation and the Quran and all that, then you don't deserve to be talking to me either, because I'm talking to a liar. Right? So he basically says that I'm not going to help you either. So the first people that the Prophet visits in Ta'if, they reject him. And he tells them, okay, you've rejected the message, then at least keep our conversation private. Don't go and spread rumors about me to the people. Don't go and poison their minds. He asked them to commit to doing that. On the contrary, they went and they told everyone in the city that, they basically ruined the Prophet's, reputation before he was able to preach to people. And he didn't achieve success with anybody in the city of Ta'if. In fact, towards the end of his stay there, he was they were taking stones and they were throwing the stones at him. And he was actually bleeding because of the stones that had hit his blessed body. Now, he's leaving Ta'if. Think about, if I think about myself, right? Let's say I spent all this time away from home, right? I'm anxious to get back home. And here it is, I look at myself, maybe I'm a dismal failure, right? Because I wasn't able to, be successful with anyone, right? But what is the mindset of our Prophet, right? At that time, right, history says that, he was filled with dua, right? He's talking to Allah the whole time, and he's seeking solace with Allah. And soon afterwards, right, there's a couple of people who, he's kind of just there, on the street, and there's a couple of people who own a garden who just take pity on him. They recognize him from Makkah and they say, okay, this is, he's from the Hashimis, we need to do something to help him. So they send their servant with some fruit to give to him so he has some refreshment, right? After all, they're feeling sorry for him. So the servant goes to our Prophet, and the Prophet is very welcoming to him, very gracious, right? He's building that connection. And he takes the fruit from him and he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And when this servant hears that from him, he says that, what did you say? I haven't heard that in this part of the world before. Nobody says what you just said right now. So the Prophet took advantage of that and he started talking to him, right? Telling him, about what he's saying, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And he strikes up this conversation. And then finally the Prophet asks him, he says that, okay, tell me, where are you from? And he tells him that I'm from Nainawa, and I'm from here. And so he tells him, okay, well, that is the place where my brother Yunus, the Prophet Yunus, he's from there. And he's like, you know about Yunus? Right? Tell me about Yunus. And so the Prophet tells him about Yunus, right? So he was, from that same city where Yunus alayhi salam was preaching to. Nabi Yunus's people, they're the only people who were saved, right? But because they actually accepted the message of the Prophet. When Nabi Yunus came back after that whole incident of the whale, they were waiting for him and they accepted his message. So he's from that city. So the Prophet is telling him, about Yunus, everything like that. By the end of it, this servant, his name is Idas. So Idas actually bends down and he kisses the Prophet, right? So the two garden owners, right? They're watching him. They're like waiting for him, and they're like, they're shocked, right? And they're like angry. He goes back to them and they say to him, like, why did you do what you did? We saw you kiss him. And he said, because he just told me some things that no one but a prophet would be able to say. Right? This is the power of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he gets one person to accept the message in the city of Ta'if. One person, right? But success is not found in numbers, right? The Quran tells us that most of the people are not going to believe in the message of the Prophet. وَلَوْ حَرَسْتَ. Like they will not be meaning, even if the Prophet has that deep desire for them to have that faith, it's not gonna happen. But the Prophet isn't looking for numbers. Right? He's not looking for conversion rates and the type of things that, let's say, you would do in marketing. He's looking for something which is that quality, that heart which is going to accept that true iman. So our Prophet was somebody who, it was weighty for him to bear what people were going through. Right? He was somebody who would feel the pain along with the people. Okay? How would he do that? Right? How would he be seen to be feeling that pain? We saw in this incident how he would be making connections with people. He would try to find something in common. We know that there were other ways that he would do this as well. Regularly, our Prophet would check up on people. If he didn't see anybody who, like at the mosque, right, or he didn't see them around for 3 days, right, he would ask about them, and if he found out that they were not doing well, right, he would go and visit them. Sometimes he would walk to the other side of the city to visit somebody who was sick, and it would take him a long time in doing so. And he would tell people about the importance of visiting people when they are in need. Right? For example, we have hadith from our Prophet. He would tell them that every time that you go and visit somebody who's sick, right, an angel goes with you. And that angel will be with you until the day that you are resurrected from your grave, and at that time of your need, that angel is going to come and visit you. Right? So your act right here, it's going to manifest itself in comfort on a day when everyone else will be frightened, on the day of fright. Right? You will be in a state of comfort. We have a hadith, again from our Prophet. He says that on the day of judgment, Allah will say that, he will tell somebody, he says that I became sick and you did not visit me. And I was thirsty and you didn't give me anything to quench my thirst. And that servant will say that, oh my Lord, right, do you get sick? Do you get thirsty? And Allah will say that, of course, that's not, but Allah is saying that my servant was sick and you did not visit them. My servant was thirsty and you did not do anything to quench their thirst. Had you gone and visited them, had you gone and given them something to drink, it would have been as if you had visited me. Right? This is the type of reward the Prophet would give and explain that is there for somebody who visits those who are sick. Now, what is the philosophy here? The philosophy is what? That when somebody is going through something, right, as a believer, right, if you want to be influential on them, you have to feel that and go along that with them. Right? They're not alone at that time. Sometimes, you know, when we think about like how do we practice Islam and what is our relationship with believers? The model that sometimes we adopt is something similar to a restaurant. I don't know what other analogy to give for that. What is the restaurant analogy? What do we do, right? When we go to a restaurant, right, we're thinking about, okay, like, well, what are we going to eat, right? And when we go there, we go with our group of people who we're going with, like, let's say our family, or maybe like, you know, a couple of friends, whatever, right? Maybe a couple of families. We might run into other people when we go to the restaurant and say hi to them and whatnot, but mostly we're focused like on our own people. And then when we're done, right? We go back and, like, you know, it's kind of like we had our little thing there, right? And then we might meet up again like after a month or something, let's go to a restaurant and that type of thing, right? Sometimes we might get the feeling that in some centers, right, and some type of ways we have communities set up, it's kind of like the restaurant model, right? We just meet up and sometimes actually it's actually about the food, right? And people, like, sometimes people are like calling ahead, they're like, okay, you know, Muhammad Bhai, you know, like, what's on the menu for tonight, right? May God bless him and all the other kitchen staff. What's on the menu for tonight? Oh, it's that dish. Okay, well, we'll skip. Right? We'll look for another center to go to, right? It happens all over the world, by the way. Like, it happens, people know ahead of time, like, what mosque is serving what food, right? And then based on that, we're gonna like choose our thing, right? When we go, it's like we're kind of meeting the same. We have our little crowd. We're kind of meeting with them, and we might see some other people, but we're hanging out with the same type of people, right? If that's it, if that's the only type of social practice of Islam that we have, it seems like it's a very far cry from where it's supposed to be, right? The type of social practice our Prophet used to preach and used to practice himself. I gave you an example, right, of Idas. Talked about what he used to do with people who were sick. The Prophet used to do something called ta'ziyah as well, where he would go and console people who were in a state of grief. And he would set this to be like a precedent of actually going and being with them. For example, right, you've all heard of Ja'far al-Tayyar, the son of Abu Talib, right, the brother of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Ja'far was a great, you know, companion of our Prophet, and when he was martyred in battle, it was something that for our Prophet was very difficult because he was like one of his closest, like, you know, companions. So Abdullah, the son of Ja'far, who later on becomes the husband of Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, he says that when I was young, right, I still remember when my father was killed, the Prophet came to our home. And when he came, he took his hand and he put it on my head and he, you know, kind of consoled me that way. And then he kissed me. And I saw that he was crying and his tears came down to his beard. And he told us, he told me and my brother, he said that your father has earned Jannah on account of what he's done. And then he says that the Prophet visited and 3 days later he came again. He came again, he came inside again, he checked up on us. He told us that you are the successors of your father. You have to carry his legacy forward, right? This is your responsibility. Now, imagine, you know, in that child's mind, right, what's happening here, right? He's shattered because his father is no longer there. But what's happening is the Prophet is there and he's showing that he too is moved by this. You're not alone in your grief. I'm there, I'm grieving with you. But I'm also there to give you hope. I'm also there to give you consolation. I'm there with you. And then it's not just a one-time thing. I'm there with you afterwards as well. right? And we know that Abdullah ibn Ja'far was somebody who was always close to the Ahlul Bayt. After all, why would Imam alayhi salam give his daughter in marriage to Abdullah? It means that there was a tight connection that was built at that time, and it continued afterwards as well. I don't know if if you think back to the times where you have been afflicted with something difficult. This happened in your life. I don't know if this happened. May Allah protect you. But this is the dunya, right? In the dunya, we're here to be tested and tried. And sometimes things happen and they're very difficult. Who is it who can have the biggest impact in your life at that time? If you think back and you ask yourself, when something difficult happened to you, who do you remember as being there for you at that time? I can tell you in my life, and maybe I'm sure if I would ask you, you'd say the same thing, that it wasn't those people who came and just said, hey, if you need something, I'll be there for you. We appreciate that. That's great. They come and they said that, right? It wasn't those people who really had an impact. Who are the people who actually had an impact? I think back, I'm like, they're the ones who I really appreciate the most. It was the people who actually came and said, I want you to tell me, however much you're comfortable, I want you to tell me what happened. I want you to tell me how you're feeling about it. I want you to tell me, like, what was your reaction? I want to hear from you. I want to actually feel what you're feeling. And they took that time. They came in person, if they could, and they said that I'm here for you right now. I'm not just dropping off like a care package for you and I'm taking off, right? And I'm giving you my number if you need anything like that. I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to follow up as well too, right? I'm going to follow up. I'm going to make sure that you know that I'm here for you. And I'm not just here for you because of this crisis that's going on in your life. I'm here for you even after that as well, right? Because that's my responsibility. I'm connected with you at that level. What was our Prophet like? Azizun alayhi ma anittum. People would be tried. People would be tested. People would be going through difficulties. Those things were sometimes more difficult for the Prophet to go through than the people themselves. Right? How do we know this? Because the Quran tells us that لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ, that Ya Rasulullah, right, these people are going through different trials and struggles, right? And it's difficult for them, but you're almost dying because of that burden that you're carrying on account of the burden that they're facing. Right? That teaches us something about how we're supposed to be with people. Right? If we want to connect with them, when we want to be influential on them, then we have to be able to connect with them. Now, we know that there were people at the time of our Prophet who they had access to the man himself. Right? They had access to miracles. They had access to guidance. And they refused to take that. Imagine how troubling that was to the Prophet. Right? But he didn't give up on them. He kept on persevering. Right? This too is a lesson for us as well. Right? Sometimes, when we come to these examples, we come to these gatherings, right? We have to be thinking that, okay, what is it? What can I take from it for myself, right? So here, it's very important that first of all, if I want to be influential with other people, I can see what can I adopt from the Prophet. One of the ways he was doing that was by being a good listener, right? In our relationships with our spouses, with our children, with our parents, right? We can try to improve our listening skills. Try to understand, right? Our society would not win a prize on being good listeners. The individualism that has overtaken our society is one where people don't really care about anybody but themselves. So when we talk about these values, these are things which are very important. That how can I actually become a good listener? How can I share in the pain with other people? That's something which is very important as well. We give some examples, whether it be visiting people who are sick, whether it be being in touch with people who are going through trouble, just being in touch in general, right? Not relying on the restaurant model of being in a part of a community, having more than that. And the final thing I'll mention is that sometimes, you have people who are trying to bear the burden of others, but in doing so, they get too weighed down themselves. One of the things we see in our Prophet's life is that even though he had so much care for others, he would feel their pain, he would feel their struggle. It never prevented him from continuing on his own struggle. Right? He was the one who would be persevering. He would be the one who would always be optimistic in his Lord. He knew that success was guaranteed. Right? But at the same time, he's facing all these struggles. What was his secret? How did he do that? we can find the answer in the next verse, which is فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا فَقُلْ حَسْبِيَ اللَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُ عَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ وَإِلَيْهِ وَهُوَ رَبُّ الْعَرْشِ الْعَظِيمِ. Meaning what? That if the people turn away, then say that Allah is sufficient for me. There is no God but He. Upon Him I rely, and He is the Lord of the great throne. I don't want to open that up right now, but I'll just mention very briefly that obviously there's a limit into how much we can care for other people. Meaning that you could let's say care to the point where the worry overtakes you and you become traumatized. Right? That's not what Islam is calling us to. Right? We have to remember that at the end of the day, our reliance is on Allah, and that is the way that the Prophet took. Even though he would face disappointment, people would be in his presence, and then they would turn away from him. They would take the path away, but he would take consolation knowing that Allah was sufficient for him. Tonight is the night of the Shahada of, or the Rihla of Rasulullah, and also, according to some reports, the Shahada of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba alayhi salam. We want to spend a few moments tonight, inshallah, remembering some of the masa'ib, the difficult events that happened on this night. Inshallah, you can help me with salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallallahu alayka ya Rasulallah. Sallallahu alayka ya Nabi Allah. What a tragic incident it was leading up to the departure of Rasulullah from this earth. Rasulullah would spend his last moments when he was awake preaching to the people, making sure they would not go astray after he left this world. He would remind them of those true precious things that he was leaving behind, the Quran, the book of Allah, and his family, the Ahlul Bayt. He would tell them that these two will never separate from one another until they meet me in the pond of Kawthar in Jannah. Hold fast to both of them. Don't abandon either of them. They too are your source of salvation. It seems that Rasulullah knew what would happen after he left this world. So one time they say that it was on a Thursday. Rasulullah calls the people to his home. He says, "Let me write for you something after which you will not go misguided." He calls for a pen and some paper. But when he does so, one of the so-called companions speaks out. What does he say? He says that this man is speaking some nonsense words. The book of Allah is sufficient for us. Don't bring him anything to write with. Don't let him put down those words of guidance for us. I don't know how they were treating Rasulullah like that. What had he asked from them throughout his life? قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا. I don't ask any reward from you for what I've done for you. إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. Except that you should have love for my family. They say when Rasulullah was getting ready to leave this world, he receives a special visit from Jibreel alayhi salam. Jibreel this time is accompanied by another angel. Who is this angel? It is Malikul Maut. Jibreel alayhi salam greets Rasulullah. He tells him, "Ya Rasulullah, along with me is Malikul Maut. He is seeking permission to come into your presence. Never before has he sought permission to visit any human being. Never after you will he do so with any human being." Rasulullah gives permission for Malikul Maut to visit him. Malikul Maut greets him, He tells him, Ya Rasulullah, my Lord has commanded me to obey you in everything you say. If you wish, I will take your soul. If you wish, you will stay here in this world. Jibreel alayhi salam tells Rasulullah that, Ya Rasulullah, your Lord is longing for your company. Rasulullah tells Malikul Maut, O Malikul Maut, you can go ahead and do what my Lord wants. You can take my soul. I'm tired of this world. Jibreel tells him, Ya Rasulullah, you are the only reason that I had a desire to visit the earth. Never again will I appear in this form, in this earth. Rasulullah tells Amirul Mu'mineen, Imam Ali, O Ali, my Lord has given me the choice of staying in this dunya or leaving it. I have chosen to leave it. O Ali, you be the one who takes care of my affairs. Be the one who buries me after I leave this world. In those last moments, we know that Fatima alayhi salam must have been very grieved. This is the same Fatima who some years back had to see her mother depart from her. Now she is seeing her beloved father breathing his last. She comes to him, she recites some poetry. She says to him, Ya Rasulullah, you are the one who is the hope for the orphans and the widows. When people wanted Allah's rizq to come, they would seek that rizq through you. Rasulullah tells her, O Fatima, don't say those words, instead say this ayah from the Quran. Muhammadur Rasulullah. Muhammad is a messenger of Allah. If he were to die or he were to be killed, will you turn on your heels? Will you turn away from Islam? Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam is seen weeping, but they say that Rasulullah tells her to come near. He says something to her. For some moments, her weeping and her sadness, she is calmed down. Later on, they ask her, O Fatima, what happened? What did Rasulullah say to you that made you a bit calm at that moment? She says that my beloved Rasulullah said that the first person from his family to meet him after he leaves this world will be me. And this gave me some consolation that the separation will not be too long between me and my father, Rasulullah. What happens now, my brothers and sisters, is the tragedy. As Rasulullah leaves this world, tears are filling the eyes of those who love him, his near ones. They are crying and weeping, they are grieving, they are preparing the body to be buried. But there are those who are supposedly his companions. They have gathered elsewhere. They're busy arguing with each other, stepping over one another to see who will seize unjustly the leadership of the ummah. This is the sadness that we see that later led to all those masayib against the Ahlul Bayt. This is what led to the musibah against Imam Ali alayhi salam, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. We have to say to Fatima alayhi salam, you are grieving now, but how much you will have to grieve for what will come after you. Oh Fatima, if you could only see what would happen on the plains of Karbala. Oh Fatima, if you could only see the son of Hassan as he runs towards the aid of his uncle, of your son Hussein. When he sees the sword of the enemy soldier raised above the body of Hussein, he's just a child, but he cannot hold himself back. This successor of Hassan realizes he needs to defend his uncle. Oh, my uncle, he cries. He runs to the battlefield. The sword, it comes down. One moment he is running towards uncle. The next moment his uncle has him in his lap. Oh, my nephew. Oh, son of Hassan. Be patient, the pain will go away soon. But that is when the arrow is launched from Harmala, and the arrow pierces the tender body of Abdullah, the son of Hassan, alayhi salam. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. We ask Allah Ta'ala to accept this majlis from us. We ask Him to send the thawab of it, if any, to all the marhumin and marhumat. We ask Allah Ta'ala to grant us the honor of receiving the shafa'ah of Rasulullah and the shafa'ah of Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam in this world and the hereafter. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala tahirin.
Love of Zahra flows in my heart. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. All together. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. Love of Zahra flows in. Come forward, inshallah, please. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. All together. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. Love of Zahra. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. Ya Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah. Everyone, Ya Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah. Your voice says, Ya Rasulullah, mashallah, Ya Rasulullah. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. All of your voices. For the love of Rasulullah, love of Zahra flows in my heart. My heart. Oh Ali, when my father died, Fadak stolen, my rights were denied. Oh Ali, when my father died, Fadak stolen, my rights were denied. Ummul Abiha, he called me. Why did they push that door upon me? Why did they push that door upon me? The door knocked down, rules forsaken. Behind that door, Muhsin was taken. The door knocked down, rules forsaken. Behind that door, Muhsin was taken. Since that time, not one such spoken. But look, Ali, my ribs are broken. But look, Ali, my ribs are broken. But look, Ali, my ribs are broken. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. MashaAllah. Love of Zahra flows, MashaAllah. Love of Zahra in my heart. Ya Rasulallah, Ya Rasulallah, everyone, Ya Rasulallah, where were you? Ya Rasulallah, Ya Rasulallah, where were you to see what they did to your daughter? Ya Rasulallah, Ya Rasulallah, mashallah, Ya رسول الله يا رسول الله يا رسول الله يا رسول الله. Oh Ali, they came knocking for you. Oh Ali, tell me what could I do? Oh Ali, they came knocking for you. Oh Ali, tell me what could I do? The wood suffered, I tried to hide even the grief that my son had died. Oh Ali, my heart broke that day. In this world not long I would have stayed. Oh Ali, my heart broke that day. In this world not long I would have stayed. Leaving my loved ones on their own, facing such hardships all alone. Facing such hardships all alone. Love of Zahra flows in, mashallah. Love of Zahra, I love of Zahra flows in my heart. Love of Zahra, mashallah. Love of Zahra, oh Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, mashallah. Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, mashallah. Ya Zahra, not too fast with the tap. Ya Zahra, Ya, even fast has a rhythm. Ya Zahra, mashallah. Ya Zahra, I love of Zahra flows in my heart. Love of Zahra, mashallah. Love of Zahra, oh Ya Rasul Allah, Ya Rasul Allah, mashallah. Ya Rasul Allah, Ya Rasul Allah, Ya Rasul Allah, Ya Rasul. Oh Ali, we taught our Hassan to become the generous one. Oh Ali, we taught our Hassan to become the generous one. He would pray with me through the night. He would see you do what was right. But Ali, look at our Hassan, such kindness, yet he was poison. But Ali, look at our Hassan, such kindness, yet he was poisoned. At his body the fired arrows, I cannot help but cry in sorrow. At his body they fired arrows, I cannot help but cry in sorrow. Oh Ali, look at our Hussein. Oh Ali, can you witness his pain? Oh Ali, look at our Hussein. Oh Ali, can you witness his pain? Without support, without Abbas, oh Ali, can you witness his thirst? Oh Ali, look at our Hussein, slaughtered thirsty with his beard blood stain. Oh Ali, look at our Hussein, slaughtered thirsty with his beard blood stain. Who will tell Ruqayya he is slain, that she won't ever see him again, that she won't ever see him again. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. Jana, everyone, love of Zahra flows in my heart. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. With the rhythm, love of Zahra, my heart. Love of Zahra flows in my heart. MashaAllah. Love of Zahra. Sallallahu alayhi ya Fatima. Sallallahu alayhi ya Fatima. MashaAllah. عليك يا فاطمة صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة ما شاء الله صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة صلى الله. Can we all do it together? صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة ما شاء الله يا فاطمة صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة يا فاطمة. If no one else will mourn with me, I'll mourn you alone. Your broken ribs and your burning home. All this and so, all this love and solace of you is known. The tablet and the pen attest to you. The secrets of secrets rested with you. Allah sent from the throne blessings to you. Ayah after ayah came in your name. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu Fatima. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. How did the door to heaven fall victim unto the flames? How did they look at you with no shame? How they raised their voice and said your name. Alhamdulillah, as much as the rain. Alhamdulillah for my every pain. Alhamdulillah, you gave me Hussein. Alhamdulillah, hamd al-shakiri. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu, mashallah. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. My rhythm. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. MashaAllah. Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra. Jawab, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra. MashaAllah. Ya Zahra, his silence spoke. Indeed, we gave you the Kauthar soul. Pray to God and sacrifice a soul. Surely the barren one is your foe. The rope to Allah is taken in ropes. The hope for the hopeless struggles to hope. The rope to Allah is taken in ropes. The hope for the hopeless struggles to hope. His cheeks with tears only twice they were soaked in sajda, and when you wash your beloved. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. My rhythm. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu. MashaAllah. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Ya Fatima, in the corner, weeping when you saw her broken ribs. How will you tell your children this? How will you stand up again and pray? In the corner, weeping when you saw her broken ribs. How will you tell your children this? How will you stand up again and pray? Did you bury her on Medina's place? Did you bury her Bainul Haramain? Did you bury her on Medina's place? Did you bury her Bainul Haramain? Haidar replies, holding back heavy pains. She's buried in the heart of all the mu'mineen. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. Sallallahu ya Fatima. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima. صلى الله عليك يا هاي صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة ما شاء الله صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة يا زهراء يا زهراء ما شاء الله يا زهراء 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 ما شاء الله يا زهراء 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 السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. All together. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين ولا تسعة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين لا سيما بقية الله في أرضهم. السلام عليك يا صاحب الزمان الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن ويا شريك القرآن أجر الله تعالى فرجه الشريف. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Best time for dua, for hajat, for your request, young and old, children, youth, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever wishes you have, whatever hajat, requests you have, best time. Inshallah, first and foremost, the ظهور of صاحب العصر والزمان inshallah. Shafa of the marda of Islam inshallah. Those who are going through difficulties around the world, Ya Allah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. All together. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. 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 إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات. رحم الله من يقرأ الفاتحة مع الصلوات. اللهم صل على